Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine and I have a project to share with you today. This is inspired by my son's project that you can see here. The link to this project is down in the description box below. We made some trivia cards for our bird unit study. Today we're going to make some inspired by that project. I'm going to be using my Fabriano 140 pound watercolor paper. This is nice and thick. It is 9 inches by 12 inches. You can find more information about all of the materials that I am using for this project at the blog post that accompanies this video on my website at pepperandpine.com. Okay, so I am showing you some of the books and resources that we're going to be using for this project. I had The Practical Naturalist, I have Nature Anatomy. I'm using these resources as inspiration for our artwork as well as the questions that are going to be on the back. I also have these really beautiful flashcards that ended up not being as useful as I expected, but we're still going to have them in case we do a project in the future that we can utilize them for because they're just really nice. I have this book on birds, just a general information book, as well as this one called Birds, Nests, and Eggs. And then this one's called An Egg is Quiet by Diana Aston. It has really beautiful watercolor images. It's a really nice picture book. And this last one is a DK Eyewitness book called Birds. This is also going to provide a lot of information for the trivia questions that are going to be on the back side of these cards. I've got my Caterpillar Pro here. I'm going to trim down the paper. I'm going to make this super simple and just trim it down in half and then in half again so that these cards are 4.5 inches by 6 inches, which makes them a little bit larger than typical flashcards, trivia cards, but I feel like this is going to give us enough space to do our watercoloring on the front and our questions on the back. I'm going to arrange these on a painting board, and I'm just trying to figure out how I can best arrange as many as possible, and I find that 8 will work the best. I'm going to use some of my artist tape here to tape everything down. This is totally optional, but I really like the way that it looks, and it also gave a nice border to each of the cards. I'm using my distress inks for this project, and I have a variety of colors. You can find them all on my website, and I'm going to end up using a lot of the brown and earthy colors for this, and I really, really love the way all the cards turn out because there's kind of like a general color theme with them. So these are actually ink pads, and I'm going to be using them as watercolors, and so I'm going to squish them down on this non-porous surface here. It's going to give me just enough ink to watercolor. Now, working with distress inks is a lot of fun. They will work as watercolors to begin with, but they will dry permanent. So you don't have as much time to work with the colors as you do when you're just working with watercolors. Okay, so I've got my little paper towel right there in order to kind of take off a little extra watercolor, or rather distress ink, and I'm just going to start with some really simple brushes. These brushes aren't even that fancy. I picked them up from a local craft store. They were really inexpensive, and they've turned out to be some of the best watercolor brushes, or really just any kind of painting brush that we've ever owned. So don't underestimate some of the more inexpensive varieties. We've really enjoyed these quite a bit. I do believe they are synthetic bristles, and I find that those ones hold together a little bit better, and they're a little bit easier to get a nice fine point for some of those finer details. Okay, so I'm going to label each of these cards with whatever the image is on the front, and I'm going to try to have the questions on the back side relate to the image on the front. Okay, so the next one I'm going to do is this claw here, or this foot rather, of an owl from one of the books that we have. And I had a lot of trouble getting this just right. And it's a little bit challenging working with the distress inks as watercolors if you're used to being able to go over them, lift color, and kind of erase with your water. You can only do that before the ink dries. After that, it is permanent. So it's a little bit tricky working with it. Now, I am glad that I'm using 140 pound watercolor paper. This is new for us. I generally use the 90 pound watercolor paper by Fabriano. I find that to be really a great all-purpose watercolor paper for all kinds of projects that we do. I decided to go with a heavier one for this project, and I'm really glad that I did. It really holds up well to pretty much any kind of watercoloring, but especially for some of the cards where I felt like I really had to work the paper to kind of lift some of the color. I found that this paper really held together well. And additionally, it makes it that much sturdier for the finished project because it's not going to be something that's going to be flimsy. Now, previously, when we've done these kinds of projects, we have laminated our cards. This time, I opted not to laminate them right away. So the finished project, you're going to see them unlaminated, but I do intend to do that in the future. I am using a fountain pen to write the questions on the back of each of these cards, and I ran out of the special ink that you can use in order to erase the fountain pen. And so until that product arrives and I correct the mistakes that I made, which you'll be able to see at the end, I decided not to laminate the cards. Now, when my son did this project, he did his with chalk pastels. It was really important that we laminated them right away because the chalk pastel can get all over everything. And even if we sealed it, I felt like it was going to be a better option to laminate them. So his are definitely laminated. Okay, so I'm working now on the 5th card. I went ahead and did 8 cards for this set, but I do intend to do more. When my son worked on his project, we usually work on projects together, but for his project, I decided not to work alongside with him. And it wasn't that enjoyable for him, and I also missed out on some of the more enjoyable parts of our unit study. And so I told him as the unit was progressing and he was getting a little bit disinterested in working on his project, I told him that I would match him card for every trivia card that he made. And so he is up to 9 cards at this point, and so I figured we'll both do a total of at least 10. So 2 of them are missing from this set, but I still need to get caught up with how many that he did. And what's really great is that we're using these cards as part of our opening activities for this unit as well as for any unit. And because all of them have trivia questions on the back, and because he made a set and I made a set, we can each ask each other the questions, and then we earn a card if we get it correct. So it's a lot of fun, and we're really enjoying this, and it's a great way to take the information that you've learned during a unit and produce some work that isn't the typical work that at least we produce for our unit studies, and that generally is some kind of art with some kind of writing project, either a narration or dictation or copy work. But I found that with our science units, we did such little writing that it was important for me to incorporate the writing in some other way into our unit. And I'm finding that making these trivia cards has been a great blessing. We've done them for other units, and what's really wonderful about this is that it's not just something fun to do, and it's not just a great way to represent what you've learned for your unit. It's also really useful to use later on with other units or with the same unit, and it keeps that learning alive, and it keeps what you learn kind of current. And so I really, really have enjoyed those benefits of doing a project like this. Okay, so we're nearly done with all the artwork, which honestly took so long. I wasn't expecting it to take this long, but it took at least 10 minutes for each card. So this is definitely a big investment if you decide to do this, not to mention that it's still going to take time to create the question and the answers on the back. And while a lot of questions could have been a lot easier and gone a lot faster, I wanted to make some of the questions a little bit more challenging based on the things that we've read. And in order to do that, I had to really draw on all of the different books and materials that we had used for this unit, as well as heading over to the internet just to fact check some of the things that we were learning. Now, all of these cards have been photographed, and they are on my website at the blog post that accompanies this video, so you are welcome to use them in your homeschool. If you find any mistakes in the questions and the answers, please let me know. We did do these the best that we could. Okay, so I'm working on this last card right here, and while I did struggle a lot with that bird on the left, I am really pleased with the way that it turned out in the end. I did have to work this paper quite a bit, did have to erase a lot with water, and I had to get it before it dried permanently. And while it did kind of ruin the paper just a touch, I think in the end you can barely tell, and I'm really happy with the way that it turned out. For the white details, I used a correction pen in order to get those details. If you did not have that, you could use a little bit of acrylic paint, or if you were really on top of it, you could just not paint into the parts that you want white, but I found that really difficult, especially with the watercolor medium. All right, so there are the 8 cards completely dry and ready to go. And now I'm going to head over to all of our books and resources and start to synthesize a few of these questions. I am using a fountain pen for it. I thought it would be a nice touch. I did find that my fountain pen was a little bit hard to use on this heavier weight watercolor paper. I think you'll find it easier to work with 90-pound watercolor paper or a smooth watercolor paper or simply drawing paper. So just a note that the fountain pens weren't quite as easy to use as maybe a Sharpie. Now my son just did his in pencil, which was completely fine, but if you choose to not laminate your cards, I found that the pencil will eventually smudge, and so I'd recommend that you use pen. Now if you're going to laminate your cards, then it doesn't matter. You can use pencil, and once they're laminated, they're not going to smudge. They'll be completely protected. Okay, so let's take one more look at all of the cards now that they are complete. I love the way the watercolors turned out, and I cannot wait to make more. I think this is a fabulous way to bring a little bit of everything into your unit, and you can see all of the questions on the back. We've already played this. It was great fun, and this time around I actually put the answers at the bottom of the card, which I didn't do with the last set that we did. Okay, I also want to show you some of the mistakes that I made, and I wasn't able to erase it since I didn't have the special pen that you use, and so I decided just to hold off on the laminating until I could correct those, because once it's laminated, you cannot erase it. If you would like to see some of the other tutorials in our bird unit study, you can tap on the screen right now. That link is also down in the description box below. It'll take you to a blog post that has all of the materials and all of the projects that we did for our bird unit study. And if you want to see how our homeschool is progressing on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at Pepper and Pine.